If you think you already know everything about how Lynette Hooker vanished from her luxury sailboat, the Soulmate, you need to forget everything right now. A massive, terrifying breakthrough just blew this entire investigation wide open, and it centers on the boat's new lithium marine batteries. Her husband, Brian, claimed he spent 9 agonizing hours drifting helplessly in a broken dinghy while his wife drowned. But federal investigators just scraped the data from those batteries. And what they uncovered will make your blood run cold. While Brian was supposedly out at sea fighting for survival, the vessel's digital black box recorded major power spikes inside the locked cabin, proving someone was actually back on board, running high-voltage water pumps for a hot shower and opening the refrigerator. You cannot afford to miss a single second of this story because the digital trail has completely cornered a mastermind. And the evidence we are laying out is something you absolutely have to see to believe. Do not look away because this timeline changes everything. Federal investigators did not just walk onto the Soulmate sailboat. They treated the vessel like a floating black box. When the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service officially raided the 46-foot yacht and wrapped it in yellow crime scene tape at Fort Pierce, they were not just looking for physical clues. They were hunting for a digital trail. Brian Hooker believed he had pulled off the perfect crime by telling authorities that his wife, Lynette, simply vanished into the dark, rough waters of the Bahamas after falling from their small dinghy. He cast himself as a grieving retired Marine who battled the heavy winds and tides, drifting helplessly for 9 straight hours, with just a single oar until he miraculously washed ashore on Marsh Harbor. It was a heartbreaking, tragic tale that almost worked. But modern science and digital footprints do not lie. Weather data pulled from that exact night over the Sea of Abaco revealed the first massive crack in Brian's timeline. While Brian claimed the weather was an absolute nightmare, of violent currents and blinding elements that prevented him from saving his wife. Neighboring radar reports showed the water was actually as flat as glass. Even worse for Brian, a highly localized heavy downpour swept directly across the path where he claimed to be floating for hours in an open boat. Yet, when rescuers found him, Brian was completely bone dry. And during his hours of oversharing tiny, pointless details with emergency responders, he never once mentioned getting hit by a single drop of rain. How does a man drift through a localized downpour in an 8-foot open dinghy and come out completely bone dry? The answer is as simple as it is chilling. He was never out there drifting. Local witnesses anchored just 100 yards away at Aunt Pat's Bay broke his timeline completely wide open around 9:30 p.m., long after the usual island noise had faded into total silence. A loud, unmistakable splash echoed across the quiet anchorage. Those witnesses knew the layout of the bay. They had spotted the Soulmate earlier that day, easily identifying it as a live-aboard vessel heavily outfitted with solar panels, paddleboards, and gear strapped across the deck. Investigators traced that sound straight to the exact coordinates, where Brian's luxury yacht was anchored. That single sound completely flips the case on its head. If Lynette was supposedly lost miles away during a chaotic trip from the Abaco Inn, why did a massive, heavy splash come straight from their anchored boat at 9:30 p.m.? Why? Brian claimed he was already adrift at sea by then. But the hard evidence tells a completely different story. Someone was on that yacht under cover of darkness, throwing heavy objects into the ocean. The walls were already starting to close in on Brian. But he had no clue his own high-tech gear was about to become his worst enemy. This digital dragnet didn't just stop with the weather data. Brian Hooker prided himself on being a major tech expert, with relatives revealing that he constantly geeked out, rigging the entire boat with high-tech software and security apps. He felt perfectly safe behind his digital dashboard, completely unaware he was actually building his own prison. That 46-foot vessel was absolutely crawling with hidden cameras. One camera sat at the front of the covered pilot house, facing the back of the vessel. Another one, high on the mast, was mapping out navigational routes. And a separate blink security camera was mounted at the stern, facing forward. This particular blink camera captured every move inside the cockpit. But it also provided a clear view down into the living quarters below deck. When federal investigators started pulling data from these devices, they saw Brian's phone and watch were automatically connecting to the ship's onboard Starlink internet router. According to Brian's official story, he was miles away, floating helpless and alone in the open ocean. But those router logs paint a completely different, chilling picture. His digital footprint proved his devices were pinging the boat's network late into the night, placing him right inside the covered pilot house while he claimed to be fighting for his life in the water. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected black box that Brian completely forgot about: the yacht's newly installed lithium-ion batteries. Since the vessel had recently survived a massive lightning strike, the whole electrical system was brand new, complete with an internal log recording every single milliamp of power used. When digital forensics pulled those power logs, the data sent shockwaves straight through the investigation team. At the very moment Brian claimed he was shivering in an open dinghy, those lithium-ion batteries recorded a sudden, massive surge of power. It was the exact electrical signature needed to run the vessel's high-pressure water pumps and cabin lights. Someone was aboard that pitch-black, silent boat, rinsing salt off their skin in a warm shower and opening up the refrigerator. This digital exhaust proved the yacht was active and the walls were closing in fast on the husband. This wasn't the first time Brian Hooker tried wiping his physical location. Public employment records, recently dug up by detectives, expose a dark, troubling pattern in his past. Years before he ever boarded the Soulmate, Brian was suddenly fired from his career at AT&T for a very specific, unsettling crime. They caught him red-handed rigging the GPS tracking system on his company work van to hide his true location. He thought he was a ghost, capable of outsmarting any surveillance. But that old habit has now become damning evidence of his dark intent. The moment search and rescue teams first questioned him in the Bahamas, Brian went from a grieving husband to a desperate runner. He swore to the local police and his devastated family that he would not leave the island until his beloved wife was found. Yet within 48 hours, he packed up, completely abandoning his stepdaughter, Carly, a girl he raised since she was 3, escaping on a late flight to Nassau before vanishing back into the United States. To seasoned investigators, this is far more than just suspicious behavior. In court, it is recognized as a direct consciousness of guilt. But what Brian left behind on that boat is what will seal his fate. Detectives are now tracking down specific gear missing from the yacht's inventory, focusing specifically on Lynette's daily workout routine. Lynette was deeply committed to fitness, often training with heavy steel dumbbells on deck to stay fit. And those heavy weights have vanished entirely from the vessel. Even more alarming, just 48 hours before she went missing, Lynette shared a post showing the couple refilling their heavy scuba diving tanks at Guana Key. But when the Coast Guard boarded the boat, they found his air tanks were nearly empty, while hers remained entirely full. Investigators are now pursuing a deeply disturbing theory. They suspect Brian didn't just use his old AT&T tricks to hide his location. They believe he used those heavy diving weights and the missing workout dumbbells to make sure his wife's body would never float to the surface.